Thanks everybody for coming and hearing me talk. I can see some names in here that have just jumped in from the session I've just finished. So thank you for not being bored already. This session is about deploying Tanzu Kubernetes Grid Clusters as a service. My name is Sam McGeown. I'm part of the cloud automation technical marketing team for vRealize Automation, part of the CMBU at VMware. And I'm going to talk a little bit around this proof of concept stuff that we've created for deploying clusters as a service with Tanzu Kubernetes Grid. So this is a one-stop overview slide for VRA, in case anyone's not aware. So it's made up of 4 components: Cloud Assembly, Service Broker, CodeStream, and vRealize Orchestrator. What I like about this demo is it actually touches all of these components. It uses parts from everywhere, so it's a full sort of platform demo. Hopefully, I can get through it quickly so that we've got time to see the demo working. So vRealize Automation is our infrastructure automation platform. We can go through each of the components as I use them. Okay. Next slide. So what's Tanzu Kubernetes Grid? This is Tanzu Kubernetes Grid is our sort of prepackaged Kubernetes offering. It's leveraging the cluster API within the Kubernetes space, and it's deployed basically by an operator configuring a desired state. You deploy a local control plane or a management cluster, and that management cluster is responsible for stamping out workload clusters to various specifications. I'm not going to go too deeply into TKG at the moment, but if we have a look at this is the most sort of basic offering from Tanzu, but it makes up the sort of core of a lot of the Tanzu offerings. So really quickly, because I want to go through the demo on this one. This is the system that we're going to deploy here, and if it looks complicated, I do apologize. It is. We're using, as I mentioned, every part of the platform. So if we start off at the top, in fact, I'm going to have a little annotation. I'm going to try this. Let's try. So if we start off at the top here, on this side, this is all about deploying that local control plane or the management cluster. And then on this side is about deploying the workload cluster or multiple workload clusters. And the idea is that we stamp out a single management cluster that's then used to deploy as many workload clusters as we want. So we start off with within Service Broker, which is our service catalog, and we've got a custom form, and that custom form wraps around the management cluster pipeline. And what I'm going to demo today is actually around the workload cluster side of things, because this side of things isn't actually that interesting when you get down to it, but the workload cluster is a nicer demo. So the custom form is going to wrap around the pipeline, and this pipeline is going to go out. It's going to use GoVC to create some folders within vCenter. We're going to use an open source utility called VMware CLI to go out and download components from myvmware.com. So it'll authenticate with myVMware and download the Tanzu Kubernetes Grid CLI, and also download the OVA appliances that are required. And then we're going to use GoVC to push those appliances out to the templates folder. And we're then going to use a Docker host to spin up and initialize our vSphere infrastructure. And the process for that is it runs Kubernetes in Docker to spin up a Kubernetes cluster, which then becomes a management cluster. It deploys VMs to be a management cluster on vSphere and migrates that management cluster over to the vSphere cluster. And then we're going to have a VRO task to onboard. And by onboarding, I mean we're going to import the VMs into VRA and have them managed as a deployment within VRA. And then we're also going to push the configuration files that are required to actually access TKG later on in our workload pipeline. We're going to push those out to Git. And then in the second pipeline, which is our workload cluster pipeline, again, it's triggered from another custom form, and that custom form is going to create request a workload pipeline, and it's going to perform very similar tasks, but it's actually going to go and get the configuration required from our Git repository. It's then going to use the Tanzu Kubernetes Grid CLI to stamp out our management clusters. It's going to onboard those again into Cloud Assembly so that they can be managed through Cloud Assembly. And we're then going to add Orchestrator is going to add those clusters to the Kubernetes endpoints within Cloud Assembly and actually within CodeStream as well. Hopefully that can give you a high view, top-down view, and then I can go through the demo and actually show you this. So let's clear those drawings out. Final one, it's demo time. Let's have a look at this. Oh, and also there's another bonus as well. If I get time, I'll show you there's a workflow here for deploying in very similar way, deploying on Vsphere with Tanzu. So Vsphere 7 Tanzu Kubernetes cluster. So these are the CodeStream pipelines here, and I'll dig into them in a minute. First of all, I'm going to switch over to Service Broker, where we've got our custom forms configuration. And in true Blue Peter style, as I mentioned before, I've already deployed a management cluster, but I'll just show you the form for this one. This form's leveraging VRO actions in the background to filter and select things like the vCenter data center and the folders that are available. So I created a Code Connect 2020 cluster before. I selected my data center from my Vsphere endpoints. I put it in my TKG folder. I then select a target cluster, and based on this, we're now filtering to which data stores and networks are available. And this is all through the VRO actions and having nested inputs. So I basically created this, configured where the endpoint is going to deploy. Now the cluster plan, we can either have a production, which as it says here is a 3-node HA control plane, so 3 control plane nodes, or a development one, which is a single control plane node. I deployed a development in this case. We've also got t-shirt sizing here for the size of the VMs. So we've got small VMs through to extra large VMs. And then in order to deploy the VMs, you actually have to put in a public key so you can SSH into the appliances as well. And then also these are actually hidden behind an advanced options here because we shouldn't need to change them, but we've also got things like the Go version and the Go VC version, which is used, the name of the CLI, so the version of the OVA, and also the networks that are used in the background. So if you know what you're doing, you could probably change these if you wanted, but they're there as a kind of advanced options. So then when I hit submit, this has actually gone through and deployed earlier, this management cluster. And you can see here I've got control plane VM, which should actually be tagged. Yeah, there we go. So it's tagged with the cluster name, the cluster type, the management cluster, which is itself, and also the type, which is a management node. So we've got a management node, a load balancer, and a worker node, and then the execution is actually an artifact of the catalog run. So we have a management cluster deployed here. And if we jump back to the catalog, we can then have a quick look at the workload cluster. So this is a similar kind of form, but instead of having all the vSphere options, we're just pointing it to the management cluster that we're going to use. So I've got my Code Connect management cluster there. Let's call it the live demo. It's going to be put into the project my development project. And again, we can choose whether it's a production environment with any number of control VMs and worker VMs that are supported, or development. And then we can select the t-shirt sizing again. So let's go with a medium one. And we have got the advanced options tab here, but we're going to switch back because we don't actually need to change that. Now I'm going to submit this to get it working. And then let's have a quick look in Vsphere. So within Vsphere, I've got my TKG folder as a specified, and then it's created a folder for the management cluster, which is the Code Connect one. And these are the 3 VMs that we looked at. So the system load balancer, the control plane, and then the worker. So this is our management cluster, which is now going to be put to work to deploy our live demo cluster. So there are only 3 VMs in there for now, so you can see that I'm not making it up. So this live demo deployment here is actually running the CodeStream pipeline workload cluster pipeline. So let's have a quick look at this one. So we've only got one stage within this pipeline. The first stage is we're dropping in a private key, and the reason for that is I'm using a secured Git repository, so you need SSH access to access the configurations. So I'm running a CI task, which is a container which runs for the lifespan of this workload class, lifespan of this pipeline, and my CI tasks are executed on that container. So I've configured a host, which is a Docker host, and within that Docker host, I'm using a specific builder image to execute my TKG pipeline. If we have a look at the inputs, we can see here, these are the inputs that we configured just now. So things like the cluster name, the plan. There are some default values here, which are obviously overwritten when you access it. Number of worker VMs, the size for the t-shirt size and things like that. So we've created an SSH key, and then let's get a bit more of this. Then we're going to, as I mentioned before, we're using VMware CLI open source tool to download the components. So I'm using secrets within the platform, secret variables to export the username and password. I'm then downloading the Tanzu Kubernetes Grid CLI from my input. I'm then basically installing that, and then using the TKG Get Management Cluster to initialize the configuration files that are required. So this is all prepping the container to be able to run the CLI. The next stage is to get the configs, and so I'm doing a key scan of the Git repository. Because I'm using SSH, I don't want to be prompted to say, this is do you want to accept this key? So I'm doing a key scan here. You obviously wouldn't do that in production because you'd be vulnerable to man in the middle and all that sort of thing. I'm then doing a clone of my repository into the configs folder. I'm setting up some global settings, and then I'm copying the config files, so the TKG config YAML and the management cluster configuration, so the kube config and the TKG config, into the correct places. And then I'm running an extra TKG Get Management Cluster to actually get the management cluster that I'm going to be using. The next step is the deploy workload. So I'm going to make a few decisions based on what kind of cluster plan we're deploying. If it's a production one, I'm specifying the number of control plane machine count and worker machine count. And then I'm also exporting the overall number of VMs that will be deployed. And I need this to know how many VMs I should be importing on the onboarding stage. And then if it's not a production one, then we're just specifying the worker machine count. We don't need to specify the control plane because that'll only ever be one. And then finally, we're using the TKG create cluster command, and then piping in things like the cluster plan, whether it's production or development, the VM size, and we're also appending that command on whether the worker machine count, things like that. So this then deploys the workload cluster, and then we're calling out to, we're calling out to TKG to onboard the TKG cluster. And this is going out to Orchestrator, making various API calls, and we'll have a look at that in a second. I'm then manipulating the kube configuration to get some certificate details, so I can configure the access. And then finally, I am running another orchestrator workflow to create the endpoints within the platform. So this is still deploying this one. It takes about 8 minutes normally. Hopefully we'll be back in time to do that. So if we look at Orchestrator very quickly. So let's have a look at these workflows. So this is the onboarding TKG cluster workflow. And you can see here that we're starting off by getting an access token. So we're authenticating against the REST API for VRA. Then getting some, making all these API calls that are wrapped in actions. So we're getting the cloud accounts, we're getting the projects. We're then going to manipulate those objects. So we're going to get the data that we need from them, which is things like getting the correct cloud account based on the endpoint ID. And we're also, why is that not working? We're also doing things like filtering the names that we're going to look for, and also getting the project ID. Okay, so we're then creating an onboarding plan using the REST API, which is how we import VMs into the management of VRA. We're then listing the unmanaged machines, and we're going into a loop for a minute, just to make sure that the machines we're looking for, we're giving them a chance to be brought on board by the platform. And we're going to loop around that for a predefined amount of time. It will fail if they're not available by that time. We're then going to get the deployment that's created by CodeStream, and we're going to put that deployment link into the onboarding plan, and then import the VMs using the bulk deployment and actually execute the onboarding plan. We then wait for that plan to complete, tidy up behind ourselves, and then apply those tags that you saw to the virtual machines in the platform. So all of this is all REST API calls that have been strung together as part of this onboarding. The other one, the Adtkg cluster endpoint, is making it very, very simple API calls. We're authenticating again, and we're creating an external cluster. I've not got a huge amount of time left, so I'm going to jump back in, and hopefully we can see the fruits of the labor. So we're still executing. So we're actually on the onboarding TKG cluster, so it shouldn't take too long from there. Let's have a look. Here we go. Within the Vsphere, the TKG folder, within our Code Connect folder, I've got my live demo. I've got my single node. Remember, it was a development control plane, so it's a single node control plane. I've got my load balancer, and then I've got 3 workload nodes here. In fact, if we head over here, we should be able to see, okay, the onboarding has just completed. So the workflow is completed to onboard that cluster. So we can switch over to Cloud Assembly, and we should see our new cluster imported into the deployment. Here we go, there's our live demo deployment. And within there we have, that's a worker. We should see it tagged. Oh no, it's not tagged here. It's not executed that bit. Load balancer, another worker, another worker, and our control plane. So there, all our VMs have been imported into our deployment. And hopefully, if we have a look at the infrastructure, we want to be able to consume these and this Kubernetes endpoint. So if we have a look down in the Kubernetes endpoints here, we can actually see that the live demo cluster has been added to the Kubernetes endpoint, and it's still collecting data on this endpoint. But when the endpoint has completed collecting data, we should be able to then download the kubeconfig to actually access it from the platform there. And also, CodeStream has its own Kubernetes endpoints where we can consume and manage Kubernetes in the platform. So we should have a new endpoint configured in here too. There we go. There's a live demo endpoint. And so that's imported in there. Okay. So that is the workload pipeline complete. The management cluster pipeline is virtually the same. It runs virtually the same tasks. There are fewer onboarding tasks with the management cluster because we don't want to deploy workloads to it. But the tasks more or less do the same thing. And then as a little added bonus, there's this Tanzu workload cluster, which is basically downloading and installing the TKG CLI, and it's also installing the Vsphere plugin from Vsphere. So you need a plugin for kube control. We're then using the same sort of commands. So we're importing the management cluster, setting the management cluster, setting some environment variables, and then this looks familiar, whether it's a production or or a development cluster. We're creating a string, and then we're using, again, the TKG create cluster command to deploy, which is actually deploying against Vsphere 7 instead of my management cluster. And again, I'm running exactly the same code to import that into the endpoints into the platform. Okay, a few minutes left. Are there any questions? Is TKG available for free for anybody that has a My VMware account? To be honest, I'm not very good at the licensing of TKG. I'm not sure if TKG is free or whether it needs to be licensed. I think possibly just the TKG basic is free, but don't quote me on that. Have we got any other questions? Stunned silence. Everyone's fallen asleep. Okay. Okay. Someone who knows has told me that TKG is licensed separately. Tanzu Basic and other editions are bundles. So there you go. Julia has just posted a link. Please answer the survey questions to help VMware Code aim these correctly. The question, is this VRA 8.2? No, this is VRA 8.1.
Question on the question submission.
There we go. Yeah. Does all this come out of the box, or do you have to modify or add things? No, this is all custom configuration. So things like the Kubernetes endpoints are out of the box. The code that you've seen here, so the pipelines and the VRO stuff is custom, but it is actually available on our GitHub repository, and there's a blog on the VMware management blog. So the CMBU management, the cloud management blog. There's a blog post which details going through this installation and setup of this. So it is possible to get it working. I have several SE colleagues who've got it working in their labs, and even some customers who've been interested in configuring it and modifying it for their own needs.
And just to let everyone know, we will be uploading the video from the recording today to the GitHub page for the conference. So you can go to the conference GitHub page where you registered for the session and just click on GitHub, and we have project directories for each of the sessions, and we'll make sure slides and the recordings are placed up there.
Okay, I think we're out of time now. So VMware CLI, someone's asked where is the VMware CLI available? That if you just search for VMware CLI, it's a GitHub project, and you can download it directly from there. Maybe I'll add a slide with some links in at the end as well, that when it's uploaded. I can add some links to these things.
All right, well, Sam, thanks a lot for your session. It's awesome. Really like watching it. And thanks for everybody that was here. And just know there's 3 tracks going on, sessions all day. Hackathon and script awards will be later today, I think around 4:35 as the session starts. Check that out. Come in, say hello, celebrate, and we'll see you in some more sessions. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks a lot, Sam.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Eric.